All right, welcome into Carps Corners. We take a look at some of the things, the biggest stories that happened this weekend in college football and kind of where everything shook out. Highly eventful weekend, especially if you're looking at the Big Ten. Some of the things that you saw happen. You had Penn State, you had Auburn coming up, the whiteout. Would Auburn and the Tigers be able to handle, a raucous Big Ten environment? Everybody thought, okay, it's no big deal. And then Auburn composed themselves and handled themselves pretty well, given everything that, this was probably the first big game that a lot of these teams have had with fans. You had Michigan State, Miami down in South Florida. It's hot. It's the swamp. It's at noon. And you had a Michigan State team head down there that no one really knew exactly what they were and come out victorious. Minnesota's smacking Colorado. It was really a nice week for the Big Ten. However, Ohio State gets the win. They don't look very good against Tulsa. If you would have told me at the beginning of the week they hold Tulsa to 20 points, 13 heading into the fourth quarter, I'd say, okay, that's pretty solid. My expectations were a little bit lower. After watching it, giving up close to 500 yards, obviously not a great sign, obviously not a great thing. Points are the only thing that matters. And so just like last week with Ohio State, when they had 600 yards of total offense, only at 28 points. If you're giving up less than 7 points per 100 yards, you're doing something right on defense. Either getting stops on third down, you're doing a better job in the red zone, forcing turnovers, turning turnovers into points, like we saw with Cam Martinez to end the game. But really, the offense, it's 27-20, one possession game, just a couple of minutes left, 3, 4, 5 minutes left in the game. You get a touchdown, you get a pick six, and all of a sudden, that thing looks a lot different. However, the game didn't feel that different. And so there's a bunch of things we need to break down and look at it. And first of all, I talked a little bit last week about, the offense, and everybody was, harping on the defense because that was the in vogue thing to do. You give 35 points to Oregon, couldn't get stops, mountains of yards rushing, running the crack toss over and over again. Well, that didn't happen. Tulsa didn't have much of a running game, and Tulsa is not a great team, and so that didn't happen defensively. But offensively, there's some signs, and there's some concerns. Number one, offensive line did a great job blocking. Travion Henderson sets a freshman record, 277 yards. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. Absolutely unbelievable. And he was a rare talent, 5-star, top recruited running back in his class. And everybody knew that this kid had what it took to be really, really good. And it was just a matter of getting that opportunity and really settling in. So you saw a rotation between him and Master Teague. Mayan Williams wasn't available. And so I think they'll rotate a little bit, but they're really trying to establish that 1-2 punch. Because I don't know if you can truly try to establish more than two guys, maybe a third in a game if you have a specialty player. But it's really, really hard to establish a rhythm if you're not going to get those reps. So especially for a guy like Travion Henderson, who can get it done in a multitude of ways. It's not like he's just a one-dimensional back. He can do it out of the backfield. He can block, and then obviously he can run. And so we saw that. So starting off, offensive line did a good job blocking, fantastic, opening up holes for him, and he did the rest. And he has elite top-end speed and is able to take it the distance. However, pass pro wasn't as good. Tulsa was going to mix it up a little bit more. They're going to bring pressure from all angles. They weren't as good. And Ryan Day talked about it heading into the week. This was going to be a little bit of a test. And it wasn't going to be a test physically, because I don't think anybody was trying to sit here and say that Tulsa has, players that would be able to match up with Ohio State on a physical basis. But the way they ran their defense, it was going to be a test, for a young quarterback and some new starters, guys being moved around a little bit, how they would respond with different looks and pressure from different directions. And so that was an issue that they had to kind of sort out. And to be honest with you, it wasn't always the prettiest thing that I saw out there. They didn't do a great job picking things up all the time. Now, that's not to say it was trash, but there's a lot of work that's going to need to be done. They're going to have to get back in the lab this week and try to sort some of those things out. They have highly talented guys, but that doesn't mean that they still don't have to go out there and try to figure out, ways to be able to sort things out. Because now that once you open it up to pressure a little bit, teams are going to continue to bring it. They're going to realize, hey, they struggle passing some stuff off. We can get some loopers. We can go odd front with just 3 guys down and bring pressure from all over the place. And we'll force them to have to respond and react. And it can be very, very difficult. And so you're going to continue to see that. As soon as you open Pandora's box with a problem, you're going to see that for the next 3 to 4 weeks until you get it solved. And so you have to be able to resolve that and get it going. The vanilla ice principle. If there's a problem, I'll solve it. And once you get it solved, then it goes away and it's done. But you're going to see that on scouting tapes the next 3-4 weeks. And because of that, Ohio State opened that little box there, Pandora's box, and now they've got to deal with it. Defensively, still some issues. Well, before that, let's stick on the offense. CJ Stroud, having some pressure, but he's starting to throw the ball high. And, he talked about after the game, his shoulder bothering him a little bit. You have to begin to ask yourself the question, and this is something as a player and as a guy who's highly competitive, you're always going to lean on the fact that I can do it better than anyone else. It's called confidence. If you don't have it, you're not going to be playing sports at a high level. You better believe in yourself more than anyone else does, because you're going to have to at times, because there will be times when no one else believes in you. And so I understand why CJ Stroud wants to go out there and press on this. I also probably think that there's a little bit of stress given the fact, that he was in a quarterback battle this offseason. There's a couple other elite recruits in that room. And so you don't ever want to just relinquish your job. You give somebody a window, all of a sudden they start to look good. And then there's some questions that start to be asked, and you're trying to rush back and you're battling through it. So I understand that, but you have to be honest with yourself, be honest with your coaches, the training staff, and start asking, like, okay, at what point in time is the guy hot behind me? And this isn't just for CJ, it's for every position. And it's a question I'd ask myself: is the guy behind me able to do my job better than I can in my current state and condition? And it's really hard as an athlete, because you're always going to lean on yourself, but you have to ultimately be honest with you. And I don't know if we're to that point, with CJ, but is it better to shut it down, rest his shoulder for a week? I don't know. And, I'm not positive on, the extent of the injury, but obviously he said there was some pain, there was some soreness. So there obviously is something there, and getting hit isn't obviously going to help it either. So, and, when you have that shoulder injury, probably less apt to run as well. And so now that that's being addressed, you're going to see more pressure. They understand that you're probably not willing to run because you don't want to get that shoulder banged on. CJ, not really a runner anyway. And so because of all those things, you mash them all up. Could be some problems down the road, but not a great day. And some of those things that we've seen kind of over the first 3 weeks begun to kind of sprout up a little bit more on the offensive side, bailed out by Travion Henderson in an unbelievable rushing attack. And so if you can lean on that, hopefully you can get some play action going. You can get some easier throws. You can begin to work it a little bit more for CJ and everything that he can bring to the table. Now, let's take a look at the defensive side. Defensive line still getting limited pressure. Started bringing some blitzes. That was good. Enjoyed that. But you're going to have to continue to bring more. And the thing is, the linebackers have got, when you're bringing linebackers, they got to get there. And so you got to figure out who your blitzers are, who are the best guys that are going to be able to provide pressure. And they have to have a relentless mentality, because when you're bringing someone, you're giving something up in coverage. And when you're going to give something up behind you, you've got to get to the quarterback that much faster. And so there's got to be a relentless attitude about it. You have to be able to go there and dominate. And I don't know who those guys are. We saw Kayvon Pope playing a decent amount, Cody Simon bringing some pressure. You saw some twists in the middle with him and Tommy Eichenberg, and they've got to be aggressive with it, man. You can't always just be in there trying to make the play. Sometimes you just got to say, I'm going to penetrate. I'm going to get into this line. I'm going to go as deep as I can. If I come out the backside of it, awesome. If not, when I have guys wrapping behind me, I have got to clear the image up for them and to make sure I'm eliminating gaps. And so they know where to go. And if it's a run, they can find the football and know where to fit. And that's been part of the problem, that's happened on the front seven a little bit, is guys start jumping between gaps. And whether it's a linebacker that's rushing or potentially a defensive lineman up there, when you bounce out of gaps, it's hard to be aggressive and play downhill from the linebacker position. Have to find a way to continue to get that cleaned up. And it's going to be a work in progress. There are a lot of inexperienced players playing on this defense. So regardless of the letters you see beside their name, whether it's senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, whatever it might be, it's experience in the games that matter. And so they don't have a lot of those guys yet, and they're still working through it. That's why they're playing so many people, because if they're not doing what they're told, they're pulling them out and they're trying to figure out what the special sauce, what the elixir can be for all of those guys to come together and to ultimately play well. So you need to see more pressure up front, a little bit D-line, a little bit linebackers, and then go into the back end. A lot was made about Barnes and Combs and the play calling and how it, the shifting and the dynamics and moving guys from the box to the field. There are coaches that prefer to be in the box. There are coaches that prefer to be on the field. I think Kerry Combs is the guy that prefers to be on the field, just kind of his personality and energy. He's now in the box. Okay. So what can you do up there? You can see things a whole lot clearer. And that's the guy who's in the box who honestly has the best perspective on what to call, especially coverage wise, because they're the person that can see everything. They have the vision from top down. And so I'm sure it's a collaborative effort, and those guys are going to be working through it. The reality is there were some of the same issues that we saw. Was there a little more zone that was played? Yeah, sure. Still played some man. Final touchdown that was given up, a little bunch route on a runaway route, I'll call it. 3 receiver bunch from Tulsa, I believe on the right side, defense is left. And so whenever you get these triangle little bunch sets, 2 receivers off the ball, 1 receiver on the ball, and you're going to play man against it. And people will say, why don't you just play zone? That seems easier. Yeah, go ahead and play zone. Well, if every time you're in a bunch, you check the zone, they see that on film. And then eventually there's going to be zone beaters and different plays against that they'll be able to utilize and take advantage of it. So that's another issue. So you have to be able to play some man against it from time to time. But whoever is pointing or pressing the receiver on the line, because generally how you play it is one guy will go up and press the receiver and he's owning him. The back 2 defensive backs or safety, corner, linebacker, whoever it might be, and however the bunch is working, they'll take the 2 receivers or tight end receiver, running back, whatever it is off the ball, and they'll play those guys out and they'll combo between them. The thing the receiver who is pressing the defensive back who is pressing the point receiver has to do is eliminate that receiver from getting vertical down the field, because that will muddy the waters and not allow the defensive backs behind him to be able to cross and match those receivers as they come out. And so on the touchdown, let the receiver penetrate down the field. There's no press. There's no physicality. Gets 5 yards down the field. It picks off the inside receiver. It picks off the inside defensive back. Receiver runs, that little out fade route. The runaway can't get to him. It's a touchdown. Everyone wants to blame. Well, he got picked off. It's a coverage. No, it's not what's being taught. I know what's being taught. I've watched these guys teach these players these techniques, and you have to go out and execute it. You have to go out when the defensive back is supposed to press the guy on the line of scrimmage. You have to press them. That doesn't mean walking up and playing tight coverage and then retreating off the ball. It means eliminating them from getting down the field. And it's tough. It's hard. It's a hard job. But you know what? You can't be a selfish player and then just leave your teammates hanging out to dry. That cannot happen on the back end. And so that kind of, takes care of a little bit of those issues and everything that we're kind of seeing. I still believe the defense played better than it did the week before. Still miles to go. Secondary, I think, played better than it did. You told me that they're going to give up 20 points, 13 heading into the fourth. I said, okay, that's not what you want, but that's probably better than I thought I was expecting. I thought this team might give up 24 to Tulsa, probably score 64, 70 points, but that obviously didn't happen either. And so there's offensive issues. And, wrapping up Ohio State here and kind of putting a bow on it, I know it's not fair to CJ Stroud, who's in only his 3rd start, to have these high expectations for him. This is a team that now every year has national championship and college football playoff aspirations. It's a team that's loaded with talent. In my opinion, the best receiving room in the country. It's got an elite running back, pretty good offensive line. It's starting to come around. And the expectations for anybody at Ohio State are to play to the highest level of your position room and the best player that's ever played that. Is that fair? No, it's tough, but that's what it is at Ohio State. And so, you're playing cornerback at Ohio State. You're talking about Sean Springs, Antoine Winfield. You're talking about, Marshawn Lattimore, Denzel Williams, Bradley Roby, guys like that, or Denzel Ward, Bradley Roby, guys like that. That's the expectation. Malcolm Jenkins, linebackers, Andy Katzenmoyer, Gradishar, Kuzno, Pepper Johnson, all these guys, Spielman, that's it. That's it. It's tough, but that's what you're compared against. And that's what you should be comparing yourself against. And so for CJ, the 2 best quarterbacks, most accurate quarterbacks we've had statistically have been the last 2. And Justin Fields and Dwayne Haskins, both playing in this offense under Ryan Day. In quarterback position, you can't compare it to 20 years ago because the game's so much different. You're throwing the ball a lot more now. It's easier for the quarterbacks. They come more prepared than ever. The rules have shifted dramatically to the side of the offense. And so there's expectations with that. And Ryan Day's here. He's a great quarterback developer. The play calls have been very good. You've got to go out and execute it. So is comparing CJ Stroud fair? Is comparing him to Justin Fields? Comparing him to Dwayne Haskins? Probably not. But that's the reality of what it is. And that's the reality of the expectation, that he has. And if it was Kyle McCord, if it was Jack Miller, if it was Quinn Ewers, it'd be the exact same thing. And you've got to be working and getting there. And so if you're not seeing those improvements to where you think you can get there, like people start looking around and saying, hey, what else is there? We've got work to do. We've got to be seeing improvement, linear improvement, to be improving to that standard, to that level. Like I said, it's not always fair. Life isn't fair. Playing at Ohio State isn't fair. There's a lot of good with it, but it's also very demanding. And it's also very difficult. wrapping up Ohio State, the good news for them and for all of the Big Ten is the Big Ten's been playing unbelievable. You look at Minnesota smacking Colorado. Nebraska played pretty well in a loss against, Oklahoma, had a chance to, potentially even pull that thing out at one point in time, playing a one-score game, looking pretty solid right there. But two of the big games, you saw Penn State doing a great job against Auburn. You had the whiteout, raucous environment. Sean Clifford versus Bo Nix. That game was going to hinge upon which quarterback played better. Bo Nix, didn't throw for 200 yards. Didn't have any turnovers, didn't have any touchdowns. Sean Clifford with the one turnover. Obviously not great, but he had some great touchdown passes. He was poised, and it is good that the Big Ten East is back. This is what you need. And I can't tell you the last time that Ohio State was not the highest ranked team in the Big Ten in the AP rankings. And there was another Ohio team in Cincinnati that was ranked above them. And so a big win for Penn State against Auburn, getting a little bit of that swag back, beating an SEC school at home, at night, prime time, everybody watching, fantastic environment. And Penn State looks like they're on their way back. They look like they're on the road to recovery. And I would say right now, like based upon how these teams have played, probably the second best team to Iowa in the Big Ten, based upon current production and what you have seen so far this year. That's the reality of it. James Franklin is doing some good things over there with the Hawkeyes. And then Michigan State heading down to Miami. Hot environment, back and forth early on. Kenneth Walker III rolling up some yards. He's been unreal. The Wake Forest transfer has been terrific. They run the ball really well. They're a tough, physical team. Miami's fake good. They've been fake good for a long time. They're ranked pretty high. They have good recruiting classes. They're not physical up front. They're not great in the trenches. They have good receivers, and they've got a solid signal caller. But they were getting pressure all over De'Aaron King. They struggled. He threw the ball pretty well, but you have to be able to run the football. You have to be able to run the football. Teams that are really good. You look at when the elite teams in college football, when they've been great offensive lines, great D lines, Bama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, like they have great skill players, but they win in the trenches. And Michigan State did that against Miami. They imposed their will and did it in a big way. Peyton Thorne, their quarterback, looking really good as well. 4 touchdowns, very, very efficient, not coughing up the football. So that's obviously a huge day. So you have Michigan State looking good in the non-conference. You had Penn State. Michigan got a win against Washington. Indiana losing to Cincinnati. That's suboptimal for the Big Ten, but I'd love to see that for UC and Coach Fick. They struggled early on in the beginning until their linebacker McFadden gets booted out for targeting, kind of flips the whole game right there. Cincinnati then can run the ball and start having a little more success on the ground and ultimately begins to kind of impose their will in the second half. And next edition of Carp's Corner, we'll get into the whole targeting thing and everything there because that's crazy. It's gone way to the other end, and they need to figure out how to delineate. You can call a penalty, but kicking a guy out of a game, incredibly punitive, unless to me, there's a couple criteria that need to be met. So I don't think that you can just go out there and do this the way and operate because it changes the competitive balance of a game so dramatically by kicking out players for making what you would say is a routine football play. And so that's a big piece of it. That's a huge part of everything that's going on. So Indiana not getting the win. They played pretty tough. Michael Penix Jr. played a little better, still not great. Some turnovers plagued them in the red zone, interceptions fumbled. Tom Allen's got defense. They play hard. They play really tough. It's a pleasure to watch that Indiana squad. But look at their record. I mean, they're sitting behind Rutgers or sitting behind Maryland, who, Maryland's win against West Virginia I think starting to look better and better. West Virginia is not a bad squad. So there's a lot going on in the Big Ten. It looks like this year, after whatever the heck that was last season that was put on, Big Ten is appearing to be back. The question now is Ohio State going to be back with them? Because they appear to be struggling out of all the schools the most relative to their expectation level. And so when you have Michigan State, Michigan, Iowa obviously getting a big win a couple of weeks ago. We'll see what Wisconsin ends up becoming. But Minnesota getting a big win against Colorado, like I had mentioned. The Big Ten is really shaping up to put together a nice resume come the end of college football of what they've done in their non-conference. And so now it comes down to the fact of, teams beating up teams. And as long as, the teams at the top don't lose games that they shouldn't, you're going to have a number of teams probably ranked inside the top 15, which I think is good for everybody within the conference. And so that'll wrap all this up for this edition of Carp's Corner. It was a robust weekend in the Big Ten. Very, very exciting. Start previewing next week here in a few days.